The first silence came dressed as ordinary life. A Tuesday, gray light pressed against the apartment windows, the rain tapping like a persistent thought that wouldn't leave, and the smell of coffee drifted through rooms that suddenly felt too wide for two people who used to share a single chair without noticing the discomfort. That morning she said late meeting, and it was the way she didn't look up from her phone that skimmed a sharp line across the surface of my calm. Not an accusation, just a quiet recognition that the distance had texture now, a roughness that caught on the skin of everything we did. The city hummed outside. We pressed our soft routines against it and pretended they held. In the weeks before that Tuesday, dinners had grown thinner, speech reduced to exchangeable pieces, work updates, the weather, whether the lease would auto renew. Her laugh, once loose and corn-sweet, became reserved, like an umbrella you open only for certain kinds of rain. Not unkind, just careful. She'd placed a coaster under every emotion. I noticed how she began to answer texts with her body angled away, how she washed a single fork and left the rest of the sink to tomorrow, how our shared playlists learned to skip songs that used to make us kiss in hallways. Love has habits, so does withdrawal, both speak in details. I told myself I was tired, that the long freight of the year had simply rolled through both of us, scattering time and patience like debris on tracks. I bought flowers that did not belong to any apology. I made spaghetti the way she liked it, garlic scarred, tomatoes reduced until they tasted like a promise held too long over heat. She took one bite, both smiled and didn't, and said she had to jump on a call. Just 20 minutes, she said, lifting her laptop like a shield. The chair across from me stayed warm for a few seconds after, then the air cooled. The empty seat became a kind of new. When you're in love, you learn the acoustics of your home, which floorboards confess, which cabinets complain, how her keys sing against the dish when she's in a rush versus when she's trying not to wake you. That night the keys were quiet, her steps were careful, midnightsy. Late meeting, she said again, panting a little, rain in her hair like punctuation. I stood at the sink with my hands in water that had gone from hot to merely obedient. I said, was it productive? She said, you know how it is. And there was a small, unnecessary laugh, a single note that didn't sound like us. I didn't ask anything ugly. I wanted to trust the shape we'd drawn around ourselves. But trust has a pulse, you notice when it skips. The next day, a zipped absence, her perfume on the scarf she never wore to work, an Uber receipt in the shared email that wasn't exactly on her route home. I watched the rain smear the city into softer shapes and reminded myself that coincidence is the laziest detective. Still, the evidence assembled itself like a quiet jury. I went for a walk in the late afternoon, the streets washed silver, the traffic distant, the smell of wet newspaper and bakery yeast. I tried to decide whether a person can lose someone who is still brushing their teeth in the next room. That Friday, I made plans I didn't intend to keep. Told her I'd be out late, practiced the casualness of it, shrugged tone, untucked shirt, the whole imitation. Cool, she said, and the swiftness of her relief touched something brittle in me. I waited under the evening's heavy drape, watched the apartment turn into a shadow theater. At 8:12 she texted, running late, don't wait up. A minute later, a second message, promise I'll make it up to you. The screen light bleached my hands. I stared at the words and felt the geometry of our life. I didn't follow her. Instead, I let the hours pass like cars on a wet freeway, endless, similar, never the one you need. Around 11:30, a notification bloomed on her iPad when it woke to its own reflection on the coffee table. A name I didn't recognize. A preview. Thanks for tonight. Still laughing at the way you told me to keep my voice down. My mouth went dry in an almost elegant way. There's a kind of quiet that isn't empty, it's pressurized. I read it twice. The second time it hurt properly. I closed the message without opening it, a fidelity to a principle already bleeding out. Sat in the dark with the hum of the fridge steady as a metronome. The rain softened around midnight. The city exhaled. In the window, my reflection looked like a man rehearsing loss, or maybe just trying to teach his face how to hold it. When she came in at 12:47, she smelled like a hotel elevator, air-conditioned, perfumed, recently occupied. You're up, she said. Couldn't sleep, I nodded. She took off her heels and laughed too brightly, as if the night had given her a private joke. The meeting ran long, she said. We were, and here she glanced down at her phone, the same glad, treacherous light painting her jaw. We were just decompressing. The question rose like heat. Who is we? But something in me refused to say it. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured water into a glass, set it in front of her like a treaty. She drank. I watched the swallow, the throat that used to carry my name like a lantern. Do you remember the first time you cried in front of me? I asked, surprising us both. You said it felt like taking off a heavy coat. She blinked. What are you doing? The hum, the water, the lamp throwing a halo over nothing. I'm trying to remember, I said, that's all. She reached for my hand, then didn't. The pause between almost and not was loud. "You're being dramatic," she said softly. "It's late." And she laughed again, a small, careful laugh that cut. I didn't respond. I walked to the bedroom and lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling where a faint crack traced the story of an old leak. The crack looked like a map of a place where people find their way back. I closed my eyes and listened to her wash her face, the water running too long. The apartment was a series of rooms with closed doors. When the light went out, I could still see the text preview, a glow that stayed behind my eyelids, a sentence that wouldn't end. The next morning, I opened the shared email and saw a calendar invite I wasn't meant to see. Strategy sync, 3 hours, a location that wasn't the office. I stared until the words dissolved into mere shapes. Then I put on my shoes, left the apartment, and let the rain find my collar. At the corner cafe, the barista said, "The usual," and I nodded, grateful for any ritual that didn't lie. I took the coffee to the window and watched umbrellas move like black flowers. When I got home, she was in the shower. Her phone sat on the sink, lit up with a new message. I didn't touch it. I stood in the doorway and let the steam soften everything, including the thought that love is not a synonym for staying. I whispered her name to the tile. It sounded like a street I couldn't cross. That night at dinner, I said, "I need you to tell me the truth." She looked up slowly, fork poised, a portrait of interrupted grace. "About what?" she asked. I held the breath that would become my life after this. The room felt like a held note. The rain began again, gentle as regret, and then I said it. "Is there someone else?" She put the fork down, folded the napkin, smoothed it with a seriousness that belonged to other kinds of endings. "Don't be silly," she said, and the laugh that followed was the last time I didn't cry. The plate between us cooled, the city hummed. The chair across from me was empty again, even though she was still sitting in it. Her phone buzzed once on the table, face up, unguarded, and a single word flashed on the screen from an unfamiliar name. "Tonight." Sleep became a hallway I walked without doors. Nights stretched like wires, every sound rang. The apartment kept time, refrigerator, elevator, rain, steady enough to make my thoughts feel wrong for being uneven. In the half-light before dawn, I'd stand in the kitchen and listen to the coffee maker cough like an old engine, the smell reaching into a place in me that still believed mornings were simple. I watched the steam leave the mug and imagined it as a kind of rehearsal for departure. Everything evaporates, slowly and then all at once. I started noticing traces I had avoided cataloging. A jacket draped over the chair that wasn't hers. A second toothbrush in the bathroom drawer, the kind a hotel might give you if you forgot your own. A receipt for wine from a bar we never went to, the kind with low lights and small tables where you could hold hands and call it strategy. The evidence was banal, the pain ancient. To love someone is to assemble a museum of them. To survive them is to decide which exhibits to. I told no one. The humiliation of saying it aloud felt larger than the violence of knowing it. Instead, I changed the sheets more often. I cleaned the stovetop until it shone like a blank page. I went on long walks where I outpaced my reflection in shop windows and turned back only when my legs insisted. Sometimes in the laundry room, I caught the scent of a stranger's detergent and felt my chest loosen, as if I were borrowing someone else's life for one breath. The city held me politely, the way a bus holds a passenger who doesn't know the route anymore. He had a name. When I finally opened the thread on the iPad, the message I'd sworn not to touch, it was right there, ordinary as a weather report. Daniel, the kind of name that makes no promises. They wrote about decks and timelines, then slipped sideways into laughs that didn't require context. He said, "Loved the way you whispered SHH in the hallway, like we were teenagers." She replied with a selfie half in shadow. I stared at this private play performed in a language I could technically read. Then I put the iPad face down and pressed my palms to my eyes until stars appeared. I met him by accident, or maybe inevitability. I was leaving her office building with a bag of pastries, the last charitable gesture I would make without irony, when a man brushed past, phone to ear, saying her name in the tone of someone who prefers not to use it in public. Dark coat, clean shoes, a haircut that cost him a decision. Our eyes met in the revolving door and something like recognition glanced off both of us and kept moving. I stepped aside. He nodded. It felt like we'd just signed a contract neither of us wanted to keep. At home, I placed the bag of pastries on the counter and stared at the box until the butter bled through. When she arrived, late again, she looked at the box with genuine happiness, and guilt flickered across her face like a bird crossing a sunlit room. "You're sweet," she said. It wasn't a compliment, it was a diagnosis. I asked her how the meeting went. She said, "Productive." I said, "With Daniel." Her shoulders lifted half an inch, then settled. "We're collaborating," she said, and for the first time she didn't laugh. Grief came to sit with me, not as an enemy but as an interpreter. It translated the silence into syntax. It told me which words not to say and which to save for later. In the nights that followed, I stopped checking her location like a bad weather app. I wrote down the hours she spent away, then stopped counting when counting turned me into a counter and not a person. I began to cook for one without explaining why there were leftovers. It was an ugly mercy. I found a therapist whose office looked like a room where someone keeps their promises. She spoke softly, not out of pity, but out of respect for the fragility of everything in the air. "What do you want?" she asked. The question landed like a plate that didn't break somehow. "I want the past back," I said, "the specific past where nothing hurt." She nodded. "We don't do returns," she said. "But we can do repairs." She asked me to describe the first sign I'd ignored. I said. She stopped finishing her sentences. The therapist said, "So did you." One evening, as rain made the streetlights into halos for no saints at all, I sat in the living room and listened to the building settle into its night version. The other man, Daniel, was a phantom with a face now, a man who also liked espresso, who also knew that she laughed with her head tipped back when she forgot to be careful. The petty cruelty in me wanted to hate him for having eyebrows too neat, shoes too polished, vowels too smooth. The tired mercy in me suspected he had convinced himself of a story where no one was truly injured, only rearranged. Both of us were wrong and right. A small turning point arrived in a mundane package, the lease renewal email. Terms, dates, a digital signature field blinking like an impatient pedestrian signal. I stared at the line where both our names were printed, names that used to make one thing. I didn't forward it to her. I saved it to a folder titled Later. Then I opened a blank document and typed, "What does leaving look like when love is still present, but trust has fallen through a soft place in the floor?" The cursor blinked, patient as rain. I didn't have an answer, but the question sat beside me like a friend willing to share the quiet. Days became workable. I learned the route from my building to the park that avoided the cafe where we'd once named birds incorrectly. I listened to the hum of the city, and sometimes it sounded like a promise that the world is larger than any one room. I stopped policing my face around her, stopped offering small talk like bandages. We shared the sink, the couch, the bed less frequently, farther apart. I slept on my side, the edge a kind of boundary both generous and punitive. In the mornings, when the light found us, it did not judge. It simply revealed. One night she didn't come home. At 2:14 a.m. my phone lit up, staying over at a friend's. "Don't wait up." I didn't text back. I stood at the window and watched the city rotating its sleeplessness, a wheel I didn't have to push. In the reflection, I saw a man who could hold both anger and tenderness without dropping either. That was new, not heroic, just sturdier. I turned off the lamp and let the dark be dark. In the morning, I opened the dishwasher and found a single wine glass washed, placed carefully on the top rack, as if someone had practiced being considerate. I reached in and held it up to the light. It was clean, no lipstick, no fingerprint. That kind of perfection is only possible when something has been held and then abandoned. I set it back gently. The day moved forward. That afternoon she texted, "Can we talk tonight? I want to come home early." And then, alone. She arrived before sunset, which felt like an apology to the light. The apartment was scrubbed of smell, no dinner started, no music, no distractions she could pretend demanded attention. She took off her coat slowly, the way people undress in hospital rooms. She looked smaller, not in stature but in intention, like someone who had practiced being less visible and wasn't sure how to stop. I said her name quietly, the way you say it to wake someone without frightening them. She nodded, eyes shining, mouth. We sat across from each other at the table we had chosen the first spring, when the city pretended to be forgiving. The chairs creaked as if participating. "I'm not going to pretend," she said. Her voice was the one she used when reading absorption instructions or calling a plumber, simple, compliant. "I know," I said. I folded my hands and unfolded them. She watched my fingers and then, softly, "Do you hate me?" I wanted to. I practiced it briefly in my chest. It didn't fit. "No," I said, "I don't hate you." The relief that washed her face belonged to someone who had been waiting for a verdict. "I did something unforgivable," she said, "and you're being kind and that makes it worse." She laughed, but it broke halfway through and fell as a cough. "I met him at work," she continued. "I liked the way he saw me, or the version he saw. It was easy, easier than trying to explain to you why I felt like a window someone forgot to open. A long time ago, when we were new and poor and shameless, she cried in a grocery aisle because the store was out of the good olive oil on sale. I held her there between detergent and bread, and a woman smiled at us like we were babies. "I'm embarrassed," she had said. "Don't be," I had answered. "We'll use butter. Butter forgives." Now in our kitchen, the metaphor tasted childish. But I remembered it anyway, and it made my throat ache with how badly I wanted to believe in. "I lied," she said. "I laughed. I made fun of you to him. Not big things, your habits." The way you always clean the stovetop twice, the way you hum when you're anxious. I tried to make myself feel like I had a right to what I was doing. It worked for a while. She looked up then, met my eyes like stepping onto ice. I'm sorry, she said. The apology was a stranger in the room, unfamiliar, formal, dressed too. Did you love him? I asked. I knew this was a poor question. Love is not an alibi. But the part of me that still took attendance needed to know. She hesitated. I loved how I felt with him, she said. I think I mistook that for loving him. She exhaled. It wasn't a plan, it was a door that kept being open. And I kept walking through. Silence lived with us for a minute. Outside, a siren passed like a thought that insists on being heard. I watched the way the light leaned across her shoulder, how it made her look both illuminated and exposed. I read the messages, I said, a preview. I didn't go deep. She closed her eyes. I know, I left crumbs because I couldn't bear the weight of what I was hiding. I wanted you to force it out. So I didn't have to choose. She opened her eyes. Cowardice is an art form. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I asked. She shook her head. I thought you would forgive me as I went, in installments. That we would, she made a small circling gesture, as if summoning a word from a cupboard, adjust. The word sat between us like a soggy paper towel. Do you want to salvage this? I asked. It came out gentler than I expected. Yes, she said too quickly, then corrected herself. I don't know, I want to not hurt you. I want to not be the person I've been. I want to go back to the week before the first time I said late meeting. I want a lot of childish things. I felt something give inside me, not like breaking, more like a knot loosening when you stop tugging. I can't unknow it, I said. Even if we keep going, this would be in the room like another person. She nodded, tears gathered without falling. I could quit, she said, find a new job, block him. Give you passwords, time, whatever you ask. The list of penances made me nauseous. I don't want to be your warden, I said. I don't want a marriage that's a parole. She laughed then, softly, and this time it sounded like her. The old her, the one who burned garlic too far but kissed like apology. You were always eloquent when things were broken, she said. I hate that about you a little. We both smiled, a funeral smile. I made him a composite, she admitted. All the parts of you that were easier, none of the parts that required me to grow. She wiped her eye finally. He liked my stories about us. That felt like love until it didn't. What do you need right now? She asked. The question surprised us both. Space, I said. Time, honesty that isn't weaponized. I looked at her hands. She had taken off the rings. Not left them anywhere symbolic, just not wearing them. The absence felt more truthful than any speech. Could we try therapy? She asked. Not to patch, but to decide. I nodded. We can sit in rooms and learn which sentences end us and which save us, I said, but I can't promise what comes after. She stood then, moved to the window, and placed her palm against the glass like someone checking for weather. It's going to rain again, she said. It always does, I answered. We stood there, two people taught by water. She turned, stepped closer, stopped. May I hug you? She asked, and the grammar of it, may I broke something tender. I nodded. Her arms around me felt familiar and wrong, like putting on a coat in summer. I held her anyway, and in the holding knew I wasn't waiting for the old story to resume. I was saying goodbye to the version of me that required her to be perfect. We let go at the same time. She wiped her cheeks, a small, brisk gesture. I'll sleep on the couch, she said, not punishment. Just appropriate, I didn't argue. Arguments are for people trying to stay. We moved through the apartment like careful thieves, taking nothing, touching less. The night gathered itself. The quiet at the edges of every object deepened until the furniture seemed to be listening. In the dark from the couch, her voice floated, small, unarmored. If I ask you to come back to me later, will you say yes? The room held its breath, and so did I. Morning arrived like a soft verdict. Pale light filtered through thin curtains, the kind that don't black out anything, only forgive it. The rain had rested, the streets were rinsed and tender. In the kitchen, the coffee maker cleared its throat, the ritual stubborn in its usefulness. The apartment smelled like steam and possibility, two things that vanish if you look too hard at them. I poured 2 mugs by habit, then set one aside to cool, a kindness that felt both automatic and obsolete. She came in barefoot, hair gathered without ceremony. We didn't speak at first. There's a kind of peace that doesn't need witnesses. She took the mug, held it between both hands the way she used to hold my face. Thank you, she said, meaning the coffee and every patient hour I hadn't earned or saved. We stood near the window where the morning made even the cheap buildings look like they were taking their role seriously. The world does that, puts on a clean shirt even when it's exhausted. I thought about your question, I said, answering the night. If you ask me to come back later, she nodded, eyes down, ready to absorb whatever fell. I don't know how to return to something that changed shape while I was still in it, I said. I can forgive you, her head lifted, startled by the word that usually comes shrouded in conditions. I can, I repeated. Forgiveness is muscles you use on yourself mostly. But forgiveness doesn't promise we keep the same name for what we are. She exhaled shakily. I don't deserve that, she said. Deserve is a court word, I answered. We're not in court. I looked at her, the familiar geography, the freckle near her left eye that I used to kiss as superstition before big days, the soft scowl she wore when sunlight lied about the time. I could love her without insisting she be the person who never failed me. I could release myself from being the person who never admitted he needed more. Both truths could live without destroying the house. I told him it was over, she said quietly. Last night before I came home, it wasn't noble, it was messy. He said things that made me feel like the villain in a play that only had 3 characters. She laughed once, empty of triumph. I don't expect credit, I shrugged. Endings don't award certificates, I said. They hand you a broom. She smiled with the corner of her mouth. You and your metaphors, she said. They make me want to be better and run away at the same time. We sat at the table without the need to perform breakfast. What do we do now, she asked. This was the question that built a life or saved a life by ending it. We make it simple to be honest, I said. We make it gentle to leave. She blinked, absorbing the shape of it. You're leaving, she asked, not accusatory, not surprised, just attending. I nodded. I'll take the smaller suitcase, I said, as if proportionality could heal. We made lists not as punishment but as goodwill inventory. She kept the couch because it fit her afternoon version of reading. I kept the bookshelf because it fit my compulsion for organizing spines by shade. We split the plates unevenly to match our appetites. The rings went into a small dish that would hold stamps later. None of it felt like loss in the obvious way. It was a distribution of objects to match the new. At noon, the light in the apartment was pale gold, the kind painters chase and lovers waste. I zipped the suitcase and sat on it briefly to close the teeth. She watched and then stood as if a cue had been called. Will you tell people I cheated? She asked. The question was not defensive, it was practical, like weather. I'll tell the truth in a small voice, I said, and only when asked. She nodded, a relief that felt like a pan set down gently on a counter. At the door, we failed at ceremony. No speeches, no vows inverted. She reached out, touched the sleeve of my jacket as if adjusting a crease. I'm sorry, she said again, simpler now, less performed. I know, I said. Me too, for all the parts I let go quiet before you did. We stood there, 2 people at the edge of a map that used to be a room. The hallway smelled like someone else's dinner and bleach. It felt right that the world didn't. Outside, the city had decided to be kind. Traffic a low murmur, a child laughing 2 floors down, the sky considering blue. I walked to the corner before looking back. She stood at the window, one hand on the glass, not dramatic, just present. I lifted a hand. She didn't wave. That felt honest. I turned the corner and the street completed its picture without me in it. In the new apartment, smaller, closer to the river, mornings have become instructions. Open the window, let the air in, make coffee, sit, listen to the building's bones. The chair across from me is empty by design. I'm learning the acoustics of a space where every sound is mine. The rain on some days is a confession, on others a blessing. I don't chase meanings anymore. I let them arrive when they're ready or not at all. Sometimes I walk past places where we were nearly happy and feel a tenderness that doesn't want anything. Forgiveness, in practice, is letting the memory keep its color without insisting on wearing it. I have not become brave, only accurate. The morning light touches my table like a hand that knows its limits. I say her name sometimes, not to summon, only to see if it still fits in my mouth without breaking. It does. The day continues. Unresolved, quiet moment. On a Sunday, it begins to rain and the river ripples under a pale sky. In that gentle sound, there's a question that doesn't ask to be answered, only heard. Gentle sound, there's a question that doesn't ask to be answered, only heard.